Hi everyone, this is Clay Spinuzzi, Professor of Rhetoric and Writing at the University of Texas, Austin. And welcome back. In this last video, I discussed identifying an object in a networked emergent activity and using that to bound the case. We were using the example of entrepreneurship. As discussed, objects are cyclically transformed. This is what makes them objects. Over time, an activity forms around the need to transform them. So how is this object of the activity transformed? Recall these characteristics of the object from the last video. It's the sense maker making sense of the structured activity. It's both objective and projective, raw materials and the envisioned final product. And it's cyclically transformed from an objective state to a projective state. And in fact, the early work on activity theory presumed stability in this transformation process. Fields are transformed from brute earth to fields of grain. The transformation is repeated and expected. We learn and develop within each iteration. We get better at things by doing them over and over, and stability develops in instruments, rules, division of labor. But that's not necessarily true in an activity network. You have a shared emergent object, such as a value proposition, in a pitch. You have it functioning as a sense integrator, creating sense across these different activities. It's emergent, tractable to multiple relatively coherent potential projections, and is synchronized, requiring the cycles of these component activities to be in sync. Not necessarily the same, but at least in sync. In a case like this, we tend to find points of stability along the path of cyclical development, points that integrate the activities so objects can be reliably transformed. So I've tended to draw on genre theory to provide an account of these points of stability. Genres here are usually instantiated in text, talk, or visuals. These are repeated rhetorical responses to repeated situations that worked once, they might work again. Over time, these responses tend to stabilize. One example is that when you construct a pitch deck, you are guided to develop the concerns and articulate things that stakeholders need to know. Even if you're not really that familiar with stakeholders, you kind of absorb the moves and therefore address the concerns of these stakeholders. In the pitch deck, when an entrepreneur learns this genre, they learn the moves that have developed to anticipate audience concerns. Here are some common moves that we see in pitch decks. Although pitch decks vary quite a bit, they tend to kind of hit these same beats. And the value proposition, that claim that I've selected as the object to bound my case, is expressed through these moves: problem, solution, customer, or market. Now, these genres don't just exist in isolation. They're linked in networks, often in progressions. And when these progressions are linked developmentally, we might call them standing sets of transformations. Or, well, not only might we call them that, that is in fact what I do call them. So, multiple genres tend to lead to the pitch deck. That's the case here. To develop a pitch deck, entrepreneurs have to develop a lot of other genres along the way. And developing these initial genres stabilizes initial parts of what will eventually become the pitch deck. In other words, it creates the tactical coherence by applying specific criteria and strategic coherence by drawing across these criteria. What we get is sort of a machine for the regular production of innovation. Different emergent objects, different industries and cycles, but a stable process that produces the value proposition. In K6C15's case, and you can see the citation at the top right-hand corner, you have this idea, a new type of magnet based on a newly discovered principle of magnetism. It only requires a momentary electromagnetic pulse to engage and disengage the magnetic field of a permanent magnet. These guys listed several different potential applications for this revolutionary new design for a magnet: factory automation, aerospace, electromagnetic locking mechanisms. They also talked a lot about transformer robots that showed up in every iteration of their pitch deck. They were super excited about transformers. Anyway, this was based on a new rule of magnetic flux flow, they said in their initial pitch deck. So how do we examine the genre transformations that are going to happen in this case? Well, we look at the artifacts, we collect a subset of the listed genres, examine how the same information is reused and represented over time. We interviewed entrepreneurs, trainers, judges, and other personnel, and we observed pitch training, but also deliberations, the judges' deliberations after the pitch. And what we found is that these entrepreneurs had to go through these different phases, which you'll see at the top, and create these different genres, these different communication or text types. Some of these were generated by the entrepreneur teams. Some of them were generated by the program itself and used to guide the entrepreneurs. And you can see some linkages here. There's quite a bit of development over time. Here the genres are strung together to reorient the innovators. No matter what the innovation, the set of transformations restructures it as a 9-month plus 3-month process. It filters out those that couldn't fit, it refines the rest. The phases bring in different stakeholders and criteria at each point. Initially, during the application phase, the question was, do they fit in the program? Will they embarrass the program? Do they have potential? Next, how are they currently positioned? Can they structure a business around this technology? Does the target market agree that there's a problem that this innovation can solve? Will it actually work? Will it work not just technically, but as a business? Given the market feedback, can the team adjust to revise the value proposition appropriately? During the competition phase where they actually pitch, have they managed to pitch the value proposition? And the judges begin to bring in previous criteria from the previous stages as well. So we're not talking just about tactics here. We're talking about the strategic understanding of the value proposition across the entire training program. So we can trace these changes in the value proposition's representation over time. And typically what we find is that innovators begin with a description. Here's my technology. How many do you want to buy? And over time, they change it from a descriptive claim to a proposal claim. You, the audience, have a problem. We have a solution to that problem. Here's how it works. How many do you want to buy? And we found different avenues for value proposition transformations over time. We call this the AADF model, which is a really unimaginative acronym for these 4 potential rhetorical transformations. Argument: why does this innovation bring value? Application: to what should it be applied in order to bring value? Design: how should it be changed in order to bring value? Financial model: to whom can the innovation bring value? So, data collection. This is a study that we did last summer. We're going to repeat it this summer. We were looking at value proposition transformations in a 9-week student entrepreneurship and acceleration program. So we collected artifacts, pitch decks at the beginning and end, mentor ratings of initial pitches, training slides, interviews of entrepreneurs and mentors, including their oral value propositions, which we always compared to these slides, and then observations of their initial and final pitches and their training. We wanted to see if things changed. So let's look at W1's innovation. It's an inexpensive, reliable way to develop detect invasive species of mollusks, and we discussed this in the last slide deck. They realized partway through that they were trying to sell a vitamin, that is to say, something that people should do to avoid problems in the future, and they would be better off selling an aspirin, a relief to current problems people were already having. And this was true not just because people are short-sighted, but also because these come from different pots of money, and eradication turns out to be an easier pot of money to get to than prevention. Initial and final value propositions. We could actually see specific changes in how they position these at the beginning and at the end. The kickoff deck really focuses so much more on detection. It does mention eradication, but it kind of mentions it as an aside. And these are more descriptive than proposal arguments. By the time they get to demo day on week 9, they've shifted focus mostly to eradication, and they've figured out ways to identify the proposal rather than just the description. When I talked to W1 in my second interview, he says it's not just early detection monitoring, this is how we can actually solve your problems. That's a lot more persuasive than the early detection modeling we were doing previously. And he said it's the vitamin versus aspirin type of thing that we have just discussed. As he did this, as he and his group transformed their value proposition, they transformed it in 3 different ways. Argument, they changed the claim itself from a solution to infested legs rather than threatened legs. Application, eradication first. Financial model, that meant authorities could draw on different, more easily available funds. In other words, he and his group were really critically thinking about what they were trying to claim here and how that claim for value, that value proposition, was going to be received by multiple stakeholders. They wanted to position it in such a way that it would meet the most success for the largest number of stakeholders. And they knew that they could change the technology to match these claims. Now, the firms we sampled, out of 17 total, we sampled 8 firms, so about half, and we found that 5 iterated argument, 5 iterated application, 4 iterated financial model, and 0 iterated the design. We think that that's simply a function of the short cycle in which people were involved. To sum up, the object of the value proposition we discovered is emergent. It's shared across activities in the network, so it sort of functions as a nexus. It's identifiably transformed over time. It's represented in the genre of the pitch. It impacts other entrepreneurial objects, including the business model, the product or service, marketing materials, but these all follow from the transformation of the value proposition. It impacts the entrepreneurial identity itself. Sometimes entrepreneurs faced with the question of changing their value proposition decide that they're not entrepreneurial material at all. But sometimes, as in W1, they bring it in as part of their identity. Finally, it's unique to each firm, but emerges from this regularized process, what we've been calling the regular production of innovation. In the next video, we're going to start looking at how we can detect and understand disruptions in the process of developing such a networked object.